Wildfires are among the most dangerous challenges faced by rangers. They move like living creatures, unpredictable and ravenous, consuming miles of forest in hours. For those tasked with monitoring fire lines, nights can be the most unsettling. The silence beyond the smoke, the endless shadows stretching into the treeline, can weigh heavier than the flames themselves. One ranger remembered such a night vividly. The fire had been contained to a controlled burn, the crackling of dry brush and faint red glow the only reminders of its presence. Beyond the fire lines stretched a wall of darkness, the forest untouched and silent. His duty was simple: watch for stray embers, ensure the fire did not leap. Yet his eyes kept drifting past the flames, into that silence where no sound should carry. At first he thought fatigue was playing tricks on him. But then he noticed movement. Not a deer, not a bear, nothing that belonged to the forest. A figure, standing motionless just beyond the fire's glow. It was difficult to make out details through the shifting smoke, but the shape was unmistakably human. Tall, thin, with shoulders too sharp, posture too rigid. The firelight licked across it briefly, enough to reveal pale skin that reflected the glow unnaturally, as though it was not skin at all but something smooth and wrong. The ranger blinked, and the figure was gone. Or perhaps it had simply stepped back into the shadows. He told himself it was exhaustion, the smoke playing tricks. But when he turned his radio on, static bled through, low, rumbling, almost like a voice trying to form words but never quite making them. He paced the fire line, torch in hand, scanning the woods. Each time he swept the beam across the trees, the figure appeared again, always in the corner of his vision, always standing still, always waiting. Never closer, but never gone. Hours dragged by, the smoke thinning as the fire settled into embers. When the relief team arrived at dawn, he said nothing. What could he say? That something had stood with him all night, just beyond the flames, watching but never moving? That the forest itself seemed to breathe around it, as though holding back whatever it was? But later, when he returned to his truck, he found prints in the ash. Not boot prints. Bare feet, long thin toes pressed deep into the soot. They led from the treeline to the edge of the fire line, and then stopped. Nothing had crossed. Nothing had returned, as though whatever had come to the flames had simply vanished back into the smoke. That ranger never volunteered for fireline duty again. He claimed he still dreams of it sometimes. The figure waiting, patient, unblinking, just beyond the fire. And in his dreams it has moved closer. Fresh snow has a way of silencing everything. Even the usual rustle of branches and distant calls of wildlife seem smothered under its weight. For rangers, winter patrols are both beautiful and unnerving, for the snow reveals everything that has passed through the forest, and sometimes, things that should not exist at all. One ranger was tasked with checking a remote stretch of trail following an overnight storm. The snow lay unbroken in every direction, perfect and untouched, until he reached a bend where the path narrowed between two tall ridges. There, cutting across the pristine white, were footprints. At first, he thought little of them. Hikers sometimes wandered off trails despite warnings, and the snow would betray them easily. But these tracks were wrong. They began suddenly, without approach, as though someone had been dropped from the sky into the snow. And they stretched in a straight line, deep impressions pressed with deliberate weight, each step perfectly spaced. The ranger followed them cautiously. His breath fogged in the icy air, the sound of his boots crunching unervingly loud. The prints went on for nearly half a mile, unwavering, unbroken, as though whoever had made them had not stopped once. But then, just as suddenly as they had begun, they ended. No return trail. No scuffle in the snow. Just one last print, sharp and perfect, with nothing beyond it but untouched white stretching endlessly forward. Unease gnawed at him. He checked for overhangs, cliffs, anything that might suggest a fall. But the ridges around him were flat, the ground unbroken. The footprints had simply ceased, like the figure had walked out of existence. He photographed them for record and turned back, trying to convince himself it was a trick of drifting snow or an illusion of light. Yet when he looked again at the photographs later, something caught his eye. The prints were not boot-shaped. They were long, unnaturally narrow, toes splayed wide like the grasp of a hand instead of the step of a foot. And though he hadn't noticed it in the moment, each print seemed deeper at the toe than at the heel, as if whatever had walked there leaned forward, pulled by something unseen. Other rangers have since spoken of similar finds. Footprints beginning from nowhere, vanishing into the silent forest, impossible to explain. Some claim they belong to lost travelers, spirits doomed to wander in the snow without end. Others whisper that they belong to something older, something that slips between places, leaving only a trail long enough to remind the living that they are never truly alone. The ranger who found them on that silent trail never went back in winter. He said the memory of that endless white path haunted him too deeply, as though at any moment he might see a fresh set of footprints forming ahead of him. Prints with no beginning, no end, and no earthly maker. The mountains of autumn are hauntingly beautiful, the forests draped in fiery leaves, the air crisp and sharp. But with the beauty comes a strange kind of emptiness. Sound carries differently on the ridges, bouncing and twisting until it feels as though the forest itself has a voice. Rangers know this well, but even they cannot always explain what they hear. One ranger was conducting a night patrol along a high ridge notorious for sudden accidents. The wind was strong, rattling branches, but otherwise the forest lay still. Then, cutting through the night, came a scream. It was raw, jagged, human, a voice split with terror. It rose from the valley below, echoing off the ridge, so real and so sudden that the ranger dropped his torch in shock. He scrambled to the edge, radio in hand, demanding coordinates for rescue, but the signal stuttered with static. He called again, louder, but no reply came. The scream rose once more, closer this time, too close to be from the valley floor. It sounded like it was climbing the ridge itself, desperate, uneven, accompanied by a noise like frantic scraping on stone. The ranger shone his beam down the slope, but the light found only trees and rocks. Nothing moved, nothing lived. And then silence. The forest swallowed the noise as though it had never existed. The radio cleared, his voice echoing back to him in his headset. He stood frozen, waiting for the sound to return, but the night remained stubbornly quiet. He descended cautiously into the valley, torch sweeping the undergrowth, eyes searching for broken branches or any sign of passage. The ground was undisturbed. No prints, no drag marks. Nothing that could have explained the screams. Later, when he reported it, other rangers exchanged uneasy glances. They too had heard it, always on that same ridge, always at night, always the same frantic cry for help that vanished before anyone could reach it. One veteran ranger put it in the simplest, darkest way. The mountain remembers, and sometimes it makes you remember too. The screams are said to echo from accidents long past. Hikers who slipped into the ravines, climbers who lost their grip on the rocks, campers who wandered too close to the edge. Their final moments, carried endlessly on the wind, replayed for anyone unlucky enough to be patrolling when the forest decides to speak. The ranger never forgot the way that scream had climbed closer, as if scaling the very ridge beneath his boots. For even now, when the wind howls through those mountains, he swears he can hear it again, rising, reaching almost upon him, before vanishing into silence once more. Deep inside national forests, there are no neighborhoods, no electricity lines, no cozy homes hidden away. The wilderness stretches endlessly, broken only by the occasional ranger station or backcountry shelter. That is why what one ranger witnessed remains one of the most unsettling moments of his career. He had been assigned to check remote trails after reports of illegal hunting. The night was heavy with fog, the kind that swallowed torchlight and blurred the edges of trees into indistinct shapes. As he made his way deeper along a forgotten path, he noticed a soft glow ahead. At first, he assumed it was a campsite, but this glow was steady, unbroken, too constant to be a fire. As he approached, the shape of a small cabin materialized through the fog. Old wood, leaning roof, smoke curling faintly from a crooked chimney. Light spilled warmly from the windows, flickering like lanterns. The ranger froze. No cabins existed in this section of the forest. He knew every map, every recorded structure, and nothing matched what stood before him. Still, procedure demanded investigation. He stepped closer, crunching leaves under his boots. The glow inside seemed to brighten, as though whoever was within had noticed him coming. He raised his torch, shining it directly at the cabin, and in that instant the lights vanished. The windows went dark, the smoke disappeared, and when the fog thinned, there was nothing there at all. No cabin, no roof, no sign that anything had ever existed in that spot. Just empty trees, swaying gently in the stillness. His heart hammered as he circled the area, searching for tracks or remnants. Nothing, only untouched earth, damp with fog. He returned to the station shaken, unsure how to record the incident. When he shared it quietly with another ranger, the older man simply nodded. He too had once seen lights in that part of the forest. Only, in his case, they had not gone out when he approached. He claimed he had glimpsed figures moving behind the glass, their shapes warped and elongated, pacing as though waiting for him to knock. Some believe these phantom cabins are echoes of settlements long abandoned, replaying themselves across the decades. Others whisper they are traps, lures meant to draw the curious deeper into the woods. The ranger never returned to that trail, and to this day, whenever the fog rolls in heavy and thick, he avoids the glow of distant lights, because he knows they may not belong to any living soul, and once you approach too closely, you may find yourself invited inside. There is something unnerving about a whistle in the forest. Unlike birdsong or the wind, it feels deliberate, human, almost playful. Rangers are taught to be cautious when they hear it. For in the silence of the trees, a whistle is never just a sound. It is a signal, and not always one meant for you. One ranger had been on a routine patrol near a dense section of pines when he heard it for the first time. A high, clear whistle carried through the trees. 3 notes, repeated slowly, echoing in the still air. At first, he thought it was another ranger signaling his location. But when he radioed in, dispatch confirmed no one else was assigned to that area. The whistle came again. Same 3 notes, same spacing. This time, closer. He called out, torch raised, voice firm against the creeping unease. No answer. Only the wind rattling needles overhead. Then, just as he began walking again, the whistle returned. Behind him, his blood ran cold. He spun, light cutting through the dark. But there was nothing. Just endless trees, stretching on without end. For nearly half an hour, the whistle followed him. Sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, always keeping pace. It never grew frantic, never changed its rhythm. 3 notes. Pause. 3 notes. A call and a wait, like someone or something was expecting a reply. At last, desperate, he stopped dead on the trail. The forest pressed in around him, suffocating in its silence. Slowly, hesitantly, he pursed his lips and whistled the same 3 notes back. The forest erupted with sound. The whistle returned instantly, louder now, multiplied, dozens of voices echoing the tune from every direction. They overlapped, tangled, filling the air until it seemed the trees themselves were singing. The ranger bolted, running until his legs ached, until the torch shook in his hand, until the whistle faded into silence behind him. He didn't stop until he was back at the station, breathless, refusing to step into the pines again. Others later admitted they too had heard it. Some ignored it and walked faster. Some replied once, only once, and swore the forest had answered with a chorus. None could explain it. To this day, the pines are avoided by those who know, because the whistle isn't just a sound, it is an invitation. And once you reply, the forest never forgets your voice. Campsites are supposed to be places of safety, clearings carved out of the wilderness where firelight pushes back the dark. But for rangers, they are also the most unpredictable, because anything can happen once the forest settles in. One ranger's account remains one of the most disturbing, for it suggested that not every disappearance happens beyond the tree line. Sometimes, the danger comes directly into camp. He had been dispatched to investigate an abandoned site after reports from hikers of strange noises. When he arrived, the scene was eerie. A tent stood half-collapsed, its canvas torn open from the inside. A campfire had long since gone cold, leaving only a ring of blackened stone. Gear was scattered, not as if stolen by animals, but strewn in every direction. Some objects oddly aligned in straight, deliberate lines leading into the dark. At first glance, it looked like panic. Someone leaving in haste. But the ground told a different story. The ranger noticed drag marks, long, deep impressions in the dirt, starting at the center of the site and stretching outward. The soil was gouged by heels, the pattern unmistakable. Someone had been pulled, violently, across the campsite. He followed the marks with dread, torchlight dancing across roots and branches. The drag trail wound into the forest, cutting through brush with no care for obstacles, as though whatever had taken the camper possessed impossible strength. After nearly 50 yards, the trail stopped abruptly. There, pressed deep into the soil, were 2 handprints. Fingers splayed wide, nails clawing into the earth, as though the victim had fought desperately to hold on. Beyond that point, there was nothing. No more drag marks. No footprints. No body. Only the silence of the forest. The ranger returned shaken, his report sparse, unable to explain what he had seen. When the site was examined later by others, they found the same thing. Handprints frozen in the soil, evidence of a struggle that ended in nothing. Other rangers whispered quietly of similar scenes. Campers gone, their belongings left behind, the ground scarred with signs of something being dragged into the trees. Never an animal attack, never blood, never remains. Always silence, always absence. The ranger who found that site never camped in the backcountry again. He said the image of those clawed handprints haunted him, burned into his memory. For what chilled him most was not the violence itself, but the way the struggle had ended. Abrupt, unfinished, as though whatever had taken the camper did not need to leave tracks because it had not walked away at all. It had simply vanished, dragging its victim into a place no living person could follow. Ranger towers rise above the treetops like solitary watchmen, their narrow staircases leading into lonely cabins suspended in the sky. From them, rangers can see for miles mountains rolling endlessly, valleys sinking into shadow. They are meant to inspire safety, to remind rangers of their vantage over the wilderness. Yet sometimes the towers themselves become the source of dread. One ranger had been posted at a remote tower during late autumn, the kind of assignment that tested patience as much as endurance. The climb each evening brought aching legs, the cabin at the top a claustrophobic box of wood and glass. Nights were long, the forest below silent except for the occasional cry of distant animals. On one such night, as the ranger scanned the horizon for signs of fire, he glanced casually at the glass pane beside him. At first, he thought he had caught his own reflection. But then he realized the face staring back at him was not his. It was pale, hollow-eyed, lips too thin and drawn back in something that might have been a smile. The features were elongated, stretched unnaturally, as though the glass itself had warped the image. Yet when he stepped closer, the face remained perfectly still, unblinking, watching him. Heart pounding, he spun around, torch raised, but the cabin was empty. Just the chair, the desk, the flickering light of his lantern. When he turned back, the face was gone. Only his own frightened reflection stared back at him. He told himself it had been fatigue, the trick of a tired mind. But then, just before dawn, he awoke from a shallow sleep to the sound of tapping on the glass. Slow, deliberate taps, 3 in a row, then silence. He lay frozen in his cot, staring at the darkened window, praying the sound would not return. It did. 3 more taps. Then a pause. Then again, closer this time, as though whoever or whatever was moving from pane to pane, circling the cabin in the sky. He forced himself to look. The glass was black with night, reflecting only the dim glow of his lantern. Yet in the faint outline, he swore he saw that face again, closer, clearer, as though pressed against the window just beyond the reach of the light. At dawn, when the relief team climbed the tower, They found the ranger pale and trembling, his belongings hastily packed. He refused to stay another night, resigning his post entirely. Others have since reported similar experiences, reflections that aren't their own, faces pressed against the glass, tapping sounds in the dead of night. Some say the towers are magnets for the lost, that the height draws spirits searching for a way out of the trees. Others whisper of something older, something that watches from the forest floor and climbs only when darkness falls. Whatever it is, rangers now pass a quiet warning. If you ever see a face in the glass that isn't yours, do not look too long. For once it notices you, it will not leave the window until you leave the tower. The forest has a strange way of carrying sound. A single word can travel through the trees and return in fragments, warped and stretched, as though the woods themselves are repeating it. But some voices, rangers say, do not belong to echoes at all. One ranger was tasked with monitoring a remote valley known for its treacherous cliffs. The day passed uneventfully, the forest quiet under a heavy canopy. But as dusk fell, he began to hear it. A voice. Faint at first, almost like a distant call. A man's voice calling his name. He froze. No one else should have been there. His patrol was solitary, his radio silent. Yet the voice rose again, closer this time, speaking his name in a tone that carried both urgency and familiarity. Against instinct, he called back, asking who was there. No reply, only silence. Minutes later, as he checked the perimeter, the voice returned. This time from the opposite direction. Clearer, colder. The exact same inflection, the exact same call, as if the forest had recorded his name and was playing it back through the trees. His skin prickled as another voice joined it. A woman's voice, different but equally distinct, calling his name from deeper in the woods. Soon more followed. Voices overlapping, whispering, chanting, all repeating his name with an eerie precision. They came from every side, circling him, impossible to pin down. Heart pounding, he raised his radio, demanding any sign of interference. Dispatch heard only his panicked voice. No whispers, no calls. He cut the transmission, gripping his torch tight, ears ringing with the chorus of names rising and falling around him. Then silence. The forest stilled. Even the wind seemed to stop. For a moment he allowed himself to believe it had passed. But when he turned toward the trail, something whispered directly into his ear. Not from far away, not carried on the air. Close. Inside the hush of his breath. He spun wildly, light flashing across empty trees. But there was nothing there. By dawn, the voices had stopped, leaving only the ordinary sounds of the forest. The ranger returned pale, shaken, unable to shake the memory of his own name echoing endlessly in the dark. Other rangers have confessed similar encounters. The voices never call for help, never speak words of warning or guidance. They call only one thing, your name, until you acknowledge them. And once you do, they grow louder, closer, hungrier. No one knows what happens if you answer more than once. The rangers who did never returned from patrol. Compasses are a ranger's most faithful tool. Unlike GPS units or radios, they do not fail in the wilderness. They point north without argument, guiding those who would otherwise lose themselves among endless trees. But there are places, some rangers whisper, where even compasses refuse to work. Places where the forest itself bends the rules of direction. One ranger first encountered it while guiding a search party for a missing hiker. Their compasses began to waver, needles trembling violently before spinning in circles, useless in their hands. At first they thought it was faulty equipment, but when every compass behaved the same, unease settled in. The trail they followed grew stranger the deeper they went. Signs that should have led them forward twisted back upon themselves. A carved tree they passed once appeared again 2 hours later. Their footprints crossed in places where they should not have. The forest seemed to fold and rearrange, trapping them in its silence. At one point, the ranger dropped a glow stick to mark their path. 10 minutes later, when they emerged into a small clearing, the same glow stick lay at their feet, still glowing as if waiting for them. Panic gnawed at the group. Radio spat only static, the signal lost. their maps no longer aligned with the terrain around them. Yet always, in the distance, there was the sense of being watched. Not by animals, not by other hikers, but by something that thrived in the disorder it created. By nightfall, half the group insisted on turning back. But the ranger pressed on, unwilling to leave the missing hiker behind. That was when he stumbled across something he still struggles to describe. In a clearing, half buried in leaves, lay a scatter of compasses. Dozens of them, rusted, broken, their glass cracked, their needles pointing in every possible direction but north. Some were so old their faces had yellowed, their leather straps decayed. Others looked almost new, as if dropped only weeks earlier. The sight froze him. Too many to belong to one group, too many to explain away as coincidence. These were remnants, offerings left behind by those who had wandered into the same distortion of forest, never to return. They left the clearing quickly, the rangers shaken, and by some miracle stumbled back onto a recognizable trail hours later. They never found the missing hiker. His disappearance remains unsolved, and his compass was never recovered. The ranger still dreams of that clearing, of the dozens of needles quivering in the moonlight, all trembling with the same unspoken truth, that something in the forest had no interest in letting them go. Every forest has places best left unvisited, spots avoided by animals, where the air grows too still and the ground feels wrong beneath your boots. Rangers know these places exist, though none can explain them fully. Some mark them quietly on their maps, others never speak of them aloud, but all agree. There are clearings in the woods that do not belong. One ranger described stumbling upon such a place while tracking signs of a lost backpacker. The trees parted suddenly, as though cut away with careful hands, revealing a perfect circle of bare ground. No leaves, no moss, no growth at all. Only soil, dark and damp, untouched by life. At first he thought it was natural, but then he noticed the silence. No rustle of branches, no call of birds, no whisper of wind. Even his breath felt heavy, swallowed by the air around him. He stepped inside. The temperature dropped instantly, cold enough to make his teeth chatter. His torch beam seemed weaker, fading the deeper he walked into the circle. And in that faint light, he saw impressions in the soil, dozens of them. Footprints, overlapping, leading nowhere. Some large, some small. All pressed deeply into the earth, as if the ground had swallowed those who left them. He bent down, touching one of the prints. The soil was warm. Before he could retreat, a sound broke the silence. Not a voice, not an echo, but a low hum, vibrating through the ground and into his bones. It pulsed like a heartbeat, steady and slow. The clearing seemed alive, as though waiting for him to linger just a moment longer. The ranger fled, stumbling back into the trees, refusing to look behind him. He ran until the forest's natural noise returned, until he could hear his own frantic breathing again. When he finally reported the incident, other rangers exchanged uneasy looks. They too had found that clearing or one just like it. Always circular, always bare, always marked by footprints that never led back out. No one knows what waits in those circles of silence, but one thing is certain. Those who stand too long inside them do not return. The forest does not let them. And so the stories spread from ranger to ranger, each whispered with a shiver. Not about the missing hikers, not about the voices, not about the broken compasses, but about the clearings that wait patiently, like open mouths in the earth. Because the woods are old. They have fed for centuries. And sometimes on a dark fall night, when the trails vanish and the air grows still, the forest itself hungers again.